Our next speaker is Dr. Romelito Lapitan. He's the Director of Ag Bioterror Countermeasures Headquarters in Washington, D.C. He's going to talk about the regulatory role of the Customs and Border Protection Service at the U.S. Port of Entry. Dr. Lapitan?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to this webcast. And it's a great opportunity for me to talk to you and share the regulatory roles of CBP, or Customs and Border Protection, at the U.S. Ports of Entry. CBP has, as an organization, has evolved from simple collections of duties of import goods to a multitude of functions and variety of assistance rendered to other federal agencies in efforts to facilitate legitimate trade and travel. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP for short, is composed of officers and agriculture specialists at the ports of entry. The agriculture specialist has a unique mission of protecting American agriculture. The agriculture specialists have vested in them authorities under Title 7 and 9 of the Code of Federal Regulations to enforce regulations on agriculture products coming in, do inspections to make sure that pests and diseases, they're free of pests and diseases. While CBP is engaged in facilitating legitimate trade and travel, CBP is also keen at ensuring border security, and that's preventing terrorists and tools of terrorists from entering the United States. My shop, which is the Ag Bioterror Countermeasures, is tasked with preventing deliberate entry of products that can be used as tools for agriculture and biological terrorism. There's a total of about 328 ports of entry across the nations, which includes 16 pre-clearance stations that are located outside of the United States. The most recent that opened was in Abu Dhabi. This covers a wide spectrum of environments from air, sea, the northern land borders, northern and the southern land borders, and also pathways of commodities and travelers. That's the cargo, passenger, the express courier, and international mail. There is CBP has a cadre of 2,417 agriculture specialists that are distributed in 182 ports of entry. Now, you may ask, what about the other ports of entry? In that particular case, the Agriculture Programs and Trade Liaisons Office, which from the title itself, liaises agriculture with trade, based in Washington, D.C., develop agriculture procedures, training programs to familiarize officers, CBP officers, with agricultural regulations and agriculture inspection process. Any issues, any agricultural issues that may arise are referred to the agriculture specialist for adjudication. Agriculture Programs and Trade Liaisons Office, or APTL, develops policies and procedures to guide agriculture inspections of the ports of entry. In the process of developing these policies and procedures, APTL collaborates with other federal and state agencies, the intelligence community, trade, and other stakeholders. While CBP oversees all imports and assists other federal government agencies like Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, Fish and Wildlife, and APHIS, it is important to note that the statutory and regulatory responsibilities to protect the health of humans, wildlife, and domestic animals from risks due to importations are responsibilities of these agencies. In my presentation, I'm going to be pretty much focusing on our relationship with USDA APHIS and also with CDC. A lot of the details of the presentation I'm going to be providing had been discussed by the previous speakers, so I'm just going to kind of reemphasize them. CDC interacts with the Department of Homeland Security through the Office of Health Affairs and directly to CBP via alerts and bulletins that in regards to disease outbreak. CDC would notify CBP, for instance, if they know of travelers, pending travels of travelers that has history of communicable disease. In which case, CBP can assist CDC at the ports of entry upon arrival of the traveler, or abroad if, upon request, CDC wants help in preventing the traveler, the ill traveler, from boarding the plane. So we can assist in that way. Our officers and agriculture specialists at the ports of entry has got basic training to visually assess a sick passenger. It's a very basic training, and CDC had provided the ring guidance to us to recognize, isolate, notify, and give support to ill travelers. So if we recognize an ill traveler, or if the traveler actually declared that he's sick and requires assistance, then we would isolate him and we would notify the proper public health officials, or if the disease or whatever disease or illness that's declared is communicable, then we we notify the local CDC quarantine staff. The recent Ebola event, we have assisted CDC in monitoring temperatures of those travelers coming from the three West African countries that were Ebola infected. CBP also ensures that trade is in compliance with the regulatory requirements of other federal agencies. In our case, under USDA regulations, and also in the case of CDC requirements. Bushmeat, for instance, is a very restricted product, both in the cargo and passenger environment, and whenever we intercept something that resembles like bushmeat, then we refer it to CDC or Fish and Wildlife. So depending on what actions they take, we either transfer custody to these agencies, and or if they're not interested, then we dispose of them ourselves, according to 9 CFR, USDA 9 CFR. Importation of products that may be potentially carrying infectious diseases. Dr. Langer had actually touched on that. There's two requirements. One is the CDC issued importation permit, or a letter of proof of render non-infectious. So those are the two requirements that we looked at. Importation of live animals. We always encounter this, whether in transit or coming into the United States. So CDC is actually notified of the arrival to anticipate arrival of these shipments, live animals, especially monkeys. So CBP is there to assist CDC to make sure that the carrier remains sealed and intact for arrival of CDC. That's as far as we go. We don't board the plane, or we don't board the carriers. That's CDC's responsibility. But what we do in the process is that we get the entry, and then we do entry verification. This is kind of a basic protocol that we follow to make sure that whatever is filed and manifested is actually what's arriving. So we just check the permit compliance and notify CDC, for instance, if we encounter a plane accidentally, for example, that CDC is unaware of, but somehow it's laden with something that has nexus to CDC regulations. So we would notify CDC in that regard. Etiologic agents, we encounter this a lot, importation, and that includes, again, this was discussed earlier, blood samples, bats, for instance. Bats, monkeys, African rodents, those are highly restricted or highly regulated imports because of their potential to carry viruses that can cause hemorrhagic fever. So it was discussed earlier that they can only enter if their purpose is for scientific research, education, or exhibition. So we look at that. We look at the paperwork in that regard to make sure. Some etiologic agents like ticks, mosquitoes, and snails, those are highly regulated too, so we check for the permit. And we notify CDC whenever we encounter similar thing. And or APHIS if the blood, for instance, that we encounter is blood of animals. Human remains are also also goes through the ports of entry, and we would notify CDC, local CDC quarantine staff if the cause of death is unknown, or due to communicable diseases, or if the conditions of entry, like for instance, if the casket is not hermetically sealed, or if there's no CDC issued permit, then we would contact and notify CDC for action. Importation of select agents and toxins was discussed earlier by Mr. McLee. Again, basic protocol that we do, we verify the entry to make sure that it exactly match, whatever is manifested, exactly match what's in the label, what's in the invoice, whatever is in the permit. In this particular case, not the permit, but the APHIS CDC Form 2. If we encounter anything that's unmarked, that has discrepancy in the entry, then we would refer that to CDC for adjudication. It is always recommended and for CBP to be provided with advance notification of arrival, and that advance notification, we don't have any formal established formal protocol with CDC in this regard, but we have an informal protocol that we had with APHIS to actually notify us of an incoming shipment to make sure that we anticipate its arrival at the port of entry, because these are something that, as much as possible, we would like to facilitate through the ports of entry. We don't have any biosafety BSL lab to actually hold them, and the fastest, the quickest we can expedite them, making sure that all the requirements are met, the better. The advance notification that we get from APHIS, for instance, would include information about whoever is bringing them permit and all the other documentations that are required. So in summary of the inspection processes that we do, we do entry verification, we look at the documents, and if there's any discrepancy, we refer it to the appropriate agency. One part of the established protocols that agriculture specialists do is to mitigate the risk is inspection of international garbage, because foreign garbage are high-risk host entry potential of pathogenic diseases. So CBP has established joint agreement with USDA to issue compliance agreement with those operators that actually handles international garbage, like incinerators, steam sterilizers, and we issue compliance agreement in air, maritime, and also in military facilities. So USDA does the initial inspection to make sure that they're in compliant, and then CBP takes over in monitoring to make sure that they comply with the agreement. And only certified operators can handle and dispose of international garbage to make sure that they're discarded or disposed of properly. So in a commercial cargo environment, we have another layer of screening process, and that is through advanced screening. The Bioterrorism Act of 2002 requires that all commercial imports, formal entries, be filed in advance prior to entry or prior to arrival. In the case of an air environment, they're required 4 hours, at least 4 hours prior to arrival. In sea environment maritime, it's 24 hours. In land border and in rail, it's 2 hours. Unless the company or the importers are members of the CBP Trusted Trade Program, like the CT-PAT or the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program, in which case they can file their entry 30 minutes prior to arrival. Packages and luggage of crew that are referred to the agriculture secondary for reasons for suspicion of something that contained in there are subject to non-intrusive inspection. I mentioned advance notification of shipments is highly recommended because if during transport or in transit, of the packages or of the shipments, a lot of times the labels are damaged, the box are damaged, and there is, the information where the package is going to go to is not legible. So in that particular case, it would be kind of nice to have some kind of an advance notification so we can actually refer it to the appropriate agency. Another example of an important marking would be the biohazard as well as the do not X-ray, because select agents that are viable, for instance, if the package is damaged and the labels are not legible and they don't have any markings of like do not X-ray, it might be X-rayed and the viability of the content may be compromised. So it's so important to actually have a very legible, all the labels in the package, clearly visible, biohazard sign if they're biohazard, and also the UN markings that has the content. If it's select agents, usually it's like infectious substance. If it's got dry eyes on them, it must be clearly indicated. It has been mentioned earlier that hand carrying in cabin is not permissible anymore. And this is one of those things that, if you have dry eyes can actually give off carbon dioxide, and that's the reason why it's kind of dangerous to actually put it in a cabin, especially the pressurized cabin. In a commercial ship, select agents, importation of select agents has got to go through the commercial environment. In cases where the package, for instance, is damaged, unmarked, and is leaking, that's always destined to destruction. We ask the assistance of another component of CBP, which is the laboratory, scientific, and services, for further guidance to make sure that if it's biohazard, it is disposed of properly. In a passenger environment, I'm sure you have gone through the port of entry coming from a foreign country, that in coming in, you have to declare to customs in a form, which is a 6059B, whatever you're bringing, agricultural products, disease agents, cell cultures, so on and so forth. If you're bringing in soil, you have to declare that in the 6059B and submit that to customs. If you're a member of the Trusted Traveler Program like Global Entry, you don't need to fill that up. Instead, you go through a kiosk and you answer the same questions, and it prints out the receipt that you hand to the customs officer at the gate. I kind of mentioned that the CBP doesn't have, the Ports of Entry doesn't have a biosafety lab, and so the faster that we process shipments, especially those biohazardous shipments, the better. And that's assuming that, of course, that they have all the requirements met. Any materials that are prohibited and seized are destroyed, and or if the appropriate agency requires that it be handed to them, then we transfer custody to the appropriate agency. So having said all of this, what does the future hold? I'm sure you're all familiar that CBP is undergoing modernization process, and so we're going paperless. And sometime a year from now, we're going to go to a system, a one ACE window system, whereby the participating government agencies, 48 of them, CDC included, would have visibility on all the shipments that, well, not all the shipments, but the shipments that are coming in that has nexus to them. So it's kind of great because it would kind of streamline the process. It would facilitate the processing the entries, and also to make sure that because of visibility of the participating government agencies, any additional requirements that may be required, the PGAs now has got capability to actually send out a notification to trade to make sure that other requirements are met through the DIS. The workflow is that, as I mentioned earlier, trade files the entry, and that goes to the automated broker interface, and that the information gets stored in the CBP secured server, and that whatever information that's in there is actually visible to the agency that has nexus to that shipment. And that's something to look forward to in the process. And that ends my presentation, and I'll be more happy to entertain your questions when the time comes. Thank you.